Hello and welcome to our monthly Carnivores Anonymous online meeting. I'm your host. My name is Lisa Levinson, and I work for In Defense of Animals, and we're very eager to present this online meeting. Our goal is to help people to adopt a plant-based diet and to provide support through online meetings and also through conversations and through our special guests that we bring to you each month to be able to share their vegan story. So this month I'm very excited to introduce our speaker. I'm going to share a little bit about him before we introduce you officially. So Kim Allen Williams, Sr., MD, is the Chief of the Division of Cardiology at Rush University and specializes in cardiology, prevention, and cardiac imaging. He has served on numerous national committees and boards, including serving as the president of the American College of Cardiology, president of the American Society of Nuclear Cardiology, and chairman of the board of the directors of the Association of Black Cardiologists. He is also the founder of the Urban Cardiology Initiative in Detroit, Michigan, to reduce ethnic heart care disparities and continues community-based efforts in Chicago at Rush. A native of Chicago's South Side, Dr. Williams has over 30 years of experience as an educator, researcher, and physician. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Williams. How are you doing today, Dr. Williams?
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Oh, and thank you so much for joining us today. This is really an honor and a privilege to have you with us. So what I'd like to do is introduce to you and everyone how we usually run the meeting. And what we'll do is invite you to share your vegan story, all the trials and tribulations and the wonderful successes along the way. And then we will open it up for questions. So if anyone who's with us online, either watching on the Facebook feed, you're welcome to ask questions, and then we will answer them. And so this will be exciting. And those of you who want to stay on a little longer for some support, then we can do that after our live feed is completed. So thank you again, Dr. Williams, for joining us. And if you're ready, we'll let you share your vegan story with us.
So that's an interesting question that I get a lot. How does a person go from a standard American diet, and in fact a standard African American diet, to being completely plant-based? I actually started off relatively early. As an 11-year-old, I believe I was, when my mom ditched her job, went back to school, and one of her first teachers was a biology teacher who actually said the words to her, and to her, the entire class: everyone should stop eating animals because it puts cholesterol in your system and it causes heart disease. Now, that was really quite a long time ago, and that was something that a lot of people were not thinking about back then. But my mom came home, being as impressionable as she was, and told us that we were all vegetarians. That lasted until all the way through college and medical school, until I actually got married and had to make sort of a household decision about marrying someone who was eating a standard American diet. And you try to negotiate, and the compromise was the American Heart Association diet, step 2, which actually had fish and chicken. And the challenge was, if I could find anything that was wrong with chicken and fish, then we could stop it. But the problem was I didn't really like the stuff, so that persisted and throughout my adulthood. So I know it feels a little strange to give up something that you don't like, but because I know there are a lot of patients that I see who actually do like what they're eating. But what happened to me particularly is the not understanding that there was a relationship between ingested cholesterol, whether it was red meat, which I was not eating, eggs, dairy, fish, chicken, that ingested cholesterol could actually raise the serum cholesterol. And that's not uniformly understood by physicians. And so when I my sort of life changed, and I was no longer coaching a nationally ranked tennis player and playing tennis twice a day every day. It turns out that about a year after that, I had my cholesterol tested at one of the cardiology meetings, and my LDL cholesterol was off the charts. Normal would be less than 100, and mine was 170. And so if that had persisted, it probably would have been fatal: heart attack, stroke, death, the usual kinds of things that happen when people have high cholesterol that's untreated. Fortunately, I found out about it, and I had been influenced to try to at least look at the Dean Ornish diet by one of the Association of Black Cardiologists leaders, Tazewell Banks. He had actually been running the coronary care unit at Howard University's Washington Hospital, or DC General Hospital. And he had adopted the Dean Ornish plan after the first Journal of the American Medical Association paper. And he was always telling us at ABC that we should be completely plant-based, and he was largely ignored. But he actually talked about the fact that he was able to get essentially zero recurrences if someone came to his coronary care unit and he changed their diet to vegetarian, that in the first year there would be no recurrent events. This was a time back in the day when recurrent events was actually quite common. So having remembered that, I immediately looked up the Dean Ornish diet, and fortunately, as I was looking that same day, the Portfolio diet was published by David Jenkins in the Journal of American Medical Association, with a lot of soluble fiber in the form of psyllium, almonds. We had plant sterols and things like black bean burgers and black bean soup. And next thing you know, I'm doing a pretty good high fiber plant-based diet. Came back to measure my worrisome cholesterol 6 weeks later, and it had cut down almost in half to 90. So the rest of my dietary progress really had to do with the following publications as they came out. And the next big thing for me was understanding that doing a plant-based diet wasn't completely optimal if you were doing a lot of refined grains, refined carbohydrates, white rice, white sugar, white flour, and they all taste good, but they all share the propensity to increase insulin levels. And insulin levels mean essentially that you're going to grow obese, particularly central obesity, and that you're going to put plaque in arteries. And so it was not surprising to me after the first foray into this in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2014 that the increasing your intake of sugar resulted in a really curvilinear increase in the amount of mortality that people had. And so that meant that I had to change my diet again from an unhealthy plant-based diet to a healthier one. And my vegan Oreo cookies had to go away because of the sugar and the refined flour. It's not easy to give up sugar. For me, that was a much tougher thing than giving up animals, which I didn't like anyway. But I can tell you that it actually improved my lipids even more. My low HDL cholesterol improved significantly. I never had a lot of triglycerides, people who aren't essentially obese, people who are very athletic. The triglycerides don't tend to go up, but people who aren't running a lot and doing sports a lot, their triglycerides will go up with the refined flour. Excuse me. So that obviously has been published subsequently. In 2017, there was a wonderful article on healthy versus unhealthy plant-based eating. And hopefully everyone is looking at those kinds of publications and sticking with the whole food plant-based diet because that is the thing that will improve the longevity and maintain health, less risk factors, less medications, more ability to get out on a tennis court and run corner to corner.
Complete with your story. That's pretty impressive. So you actually had an early on experience with not ingesting animal protein. That's pretty amazing. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. And I know we had a couple of questions that were kind of ready and waiting for us, and we have one on our live feed too. So I was wondering if you'd be open to answering a few questions.
Sure.
Great, wonderful. So, one of the questions was from a gentleman who adopted a vegan diet and then had his blood levels tested, and he was really shocked to find that I think his white blood cell count was very, very low. He was worried about his immunity and questioned those results.
Right. So the important aspect of that is that the white blood cells actually are part of the immune system. They are fighting infection. They are modulating or changing how we respond to our environment. And the fact that a person goes on a plant-based diet means that there's going to be less inflammation and less ingestion of bacterial proteins and bacterial substances. And so it makes perfect sense that the white blood cell count would go down. I can tell you that at the same time that I was looking at my cholesterol back in 2003, the C-reactive protein was all the rage. And my C-reactive protein was sort of intermediate, wasn't all that high. It almost disappeared after I went completely plant-based. And so that, as well as white blood cells and interleukin-1 and all of the inflammatory markers, should actually go down when you're doing a plant-based diet, because you're not being exposed to the kinds of pro-inflammatory diet items, such as red meat and the bacteria that goes with it, trying to digest animal protein that's, mammalian proteins are actually very similar. So people will wonder, well, why do the autoimmune diseases where your body's immune system is essentially attacking itself? Well, there's a little bit of cross-reactivity, a little bit of similarity between beef protein in a muscle and our own muscles. And so people who are eating organs of another animal might find that they set up an immune response to them, and that immune response can react to their own tissues as well. So we do see a lot of reports, a few in the way, a little bit in the way of actual trials, but reports of all kinds of autoimmune diseases. So attacking your nervous system with multiple sclerosis, lupus attacking kidneys and brain and heart muscle, and these inflammatory conditions actually do tend to improve. And that is the area where I'd like to see much more research done, so that people are seriously looking at ways of improving some very critical chronic diseases by doing plant-based nutrition. So, bottom line is the white blood cell decrease is probably a benefit, not a unwanted side effect. Now, if the person has got a different kind of problem, such as aplastic anemia or a leukemia that is stopping the white blood cells from being formed, that's a completely different thing. And you might indeed find that you're getting more infections, not less.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I think it's so interesting that some of the diseases that we think of, these autoimmune diseases, might be improved with adopting a vegan diet. That's very exciting. So I wanted to ask another question that came in on our live feed. So for those of us who are watching on our Carnivores Anonymous Facebook page, we actually have the question from Beverly. She asks.
Sorry, 1 second. Doing
Sure.
a broadcast. So I'm sorry. What's the issue? Sure, go ahead. There's a live broadcast, but that's okay. All right.
Yes, that's what happens in a live broadcast. Live things
Okay.
happen. So we have a question from Beverly, and she says that she has been just eating oatmeal, 3 eggs daily, and drinking water. And then she's asking how that will help in the change over to all vegetables and going vegan. So again, just eating oatmeal and 3 eggs and water, and questioning, is this going to help her in her change to adopting a vegan diet? If not, if you had any recommendations, I think she would appreciate it.
So we try to not cross the line between doctor-patient relationship and advice. So I'm going to depersonalize it and just talk about the literature as usual. She might be interested that there was an egg mortality publication that came out, I believe it was on the 15th of the month, so about 6 days ago. And it really talked about the fact that there's a dose response between dying and eating eggs. that everyone should be aware of. The paper is being heavily criticized by the Egg Board and all of the people who are in favor of eating animal products, saying that it's flawed because the data set is flawed. The problem with that argument is that it was actually 6 different, very large prospective data sets. And it included, the health professional follow-up study, which is a bunch of doctors, and their nurses' health study, which is a bunch of nurses. And when you add all of the data together, all of them tending to show similar results, that eating eggs does increase mortality. Now, having said that they did, as you would expect, they would take this data set and look for anything that would confound the results, things that would influence the results, like is it really an increase, instead of an increase in death rate of 20%, is it an increase of 50% in people who are obese and a decrease in mortality in people who are not obese? That would be one good example. So you can actually statistically model it so you can control for weight, right? And they did that over and over again with multiple variables. The one that they found that removed the result completely was cholesterol. That if you controlled for the amount of cholesterol in the person's diet, then the eggs had no effect. Now, what is the logical extension of that? That it's not the egg itself, it's the egg yolk, because that's where the cholesterol is. And so that is the first